Hello everybody. Zach Couples, physical therapist here, and I get it, you're kind of like, Zach, what the heck's going on? Your glutes, they look like they're really tight right now, like you just had Chipotle. Is that what happened? Not really, fam. Instead, what I'm dealing with is a posterior pelvic tilt, and you can kind of see my hips are sitting way far forward, and I just can't seem to improve my range of motion in my pelvis. And we kind of sort of want to address this because, well, if I'm doing something like a squat, I might end up doing something like this. Maybe that puts a little bit too much pressure on the knees. Definitely doesn't allow me to load the hips effectively. And I'm going to lack range of motion in many different ways. Now here's the problem. A lot of peeps on the internet will tell you, well, heck, we just got to teach you how to anterior tilt and all's good. False. The reason why that is incorrect is because when you see a posterior pelvic tilt, it's actually not a posterior pelvic tilt. There's some other biomechanical things going on, and because people assume that, well, we just got to teach you to go the other way, they kind of teach you strategies that are ineffective. That changes today because we're going to go into what is exactly going on at the pelvis when you see someone who appears with a posterior pelvic tilt, and I'm going to give you two, folks, strategies that you can utilize to maximize your range of motion in your pelvis so you're not in this position all the time. You get more loading out of your glutes, hamstrings, quads, everything you need, and then no one will mess with you. Let's go ahead and check it out.
Folks, if you see someone who presents with a posterior pelvic tilt, spoiler alert, it's not actually a posterior pelvic tilt. And there's a key reason why this is. That reason is gravity. Yes, folks, you can blame George Clooney for why posterior tilts passively aren't really a thing. Doesn't mean it doesn't appear that way, but biomechanically what's going on is different. And the reason why is because when I do a legitimate posterior tilt of the pelvis, the orientation of the acetabulum, which is the hole in the pelvis where the femur resides, is biased more towards external rotation. If I'm externally rotating, I'm not putting as much force into the ground, and so I will actually drop downward. Conversely, if I anteriorly tilt the pelvis, which is actually for most subjects the standing position preference, that changes the orientation of the acetabulum towards more internal rotation. Internal rotation allows me to put force into the ground so I can stay upright. Because we always have to put a little bit of force in the ground to stay upright against gravity, you can't really see someone sustain a posterior tilt of the pelvis. Now I get it, you're probably thinking, Z, I've read the research, there's a certain portion of the population who in fact present with a posterior pelvic tilt. What gives? This is what gives. What's happening instead is if instead of me having a posterior tilt of the pelvis, what I end up doing is I end up contracting muscles that are below the lower portion of the pelvis right here, so they're kind of below the level of the greater trochanter. So we're looking at low glute max, like distal glute max, proximal hamstring, some of your lower rotators, etc. Those muscles will contract and push the pelvis forward like that, creating almost a translation forward of the pelvis. This appears to be a posterior tilt in standing, but folks, when you look at the measures that someone presents with, you can in fact see that it is not a posterior tilt. Because think about it, folks. If I have posterior tilting available, and that's my go-to, I should have a bunch of external rotation available. So you should have 60 degrees of external rotation at 90 degrees of hip flexion. Straight leg raise should be definitely way over 45 degrees. But a lot of times with these particular individuals, we do not see that occurring. What we'll oftentimes see with these particular supreme clientele is because the lower portion of the pelvis is more concentric, short, whatever you want to call it, the leg raise is oftentimes very limited, often less than 45 degrees. External rotation can sometimes be limited, sometimes it can be full or excessive. It really depends on the extent that that person is translating the pelvis forward. That's a talk for another day. And a lot of times you'll also see a deficit of internal rotation as well with these particular individuals. It's this forward translation of the pelvis why a lot of times tucking-based activities that focus on a posterior pelvic tilt don't necessarily work. Conversely, you also don't really want to drive this major anterior tilt as well, especially if you start to see the lordosis in the lower back increase, because a lot of times what's happening in that particular situation is you've just taken the pelvis and the lumbar spine and tilted the whole thing so it's pointing downward, not restoring your mobility gains. Well, shoot, if neither of those strategies work, what does? I'm glad you asked. What I will do for these individuals who are pushing forward is we got to bring them back. We got to find some type of strategy that gets stuff on the backside, lower portion of the pelvis to chillax, the outlet, so to speak. So a lot of times what I will coach my Supreme clientele to do is gently push the hips backward, just like so. It's not an anterior tilt, because with an anterior tilt, you'll see an increase in lumbar lordosis. You're gonna push the hips back slightly, and then you wanna move the pelvis up and down vertically, so I increase the amount of hip flexion present, which is going to put stuff on the back, more so on stretch, increasing available range of motion, and life will be good. And if you're wondering what that entails, folks, we're gonna go into that next. Perhaps the easiest way to teach the concept of pushing the hips back is with a modified quadruped position. And so what we're gonna do is you wanna find some type of surface to elevate your arms on. You wanna get in this position right here. So I'm not at about 90, I'm a little bit less than 90 degrees of shoulder flexion. So this is 0, this is 90. We're gonna be right about here, just like that. And I'm gonna be kneeling like so. This is about the width that I'm at. You don't want to be super wild and crazy wide. You want to be a little bit on the narrow side. And so what you're going to do in this position now is, it's kind of mimicking the standing. We want to think about pushing the hips backwards in this position. So what I would encourage you to do is take one of your hands, put it in your hip crease, and you want to think about using that as a cue to push the hips backward without arching. To minimize the arch, that's why we got this support, because we can reach to engage the ab to prevent that from occurring. So what you want to do is you want to think, I'm going to use my hip crease to push the hips back gently like that. Right here is the starting point. So you can see I'm not in this forward position, I'm moving backwards away from that. Then, what you're gonna do, folks, is you're gonna just gently, not whip it in place like this, folks. You wanna just give yourself a gentle reach, just like so. You might feel the side abs engage a little bit, the obliques for you nerds out there. You're gonna hold this position and then just silent breathe in through the nose. Long, slow exhale. So I'm reaching, continuing to think hips traveling backwards. If you've nailed those pieces, the other thing I want you to worry about just slightly, because really, like step 1, step 2 is get the hips back, get the nice reach through the arms, but you want to look up like just a little bit, not whipping your head back like this, but think about just moving your chin slightly away from your neck. A lot of times individuals who have that tendency of the posterior tilt action, they end up looking down. I don't want you looking down, folks, I want you looking up a little bit. So think, hips back, get the nice reach, look up, breathe.
Once you've mastered the modified quadruped move, we can then go into the next variation, which is going to be a bent over sink squat. Now, the reason why I call it a sink squat is because if you're doing this at home, you're going to put your hands in the kitchen sink. But if you're doing it at a gym, like I got right here, Wonderful Elevate Sports Performance and Healthcare, you're going to hang onto the bar. You'll want a ball between the knees because remember, we're trying to get the lower part of the glute, the high part of the hamstring to chillax so you're not so far forward. This will help with that. So you want to put it between your knees, just like so, and you're going to grip the bar or the sink. And then here's what you got to do on this one. You want to unlock the knees. So a lot of people who have that posterior tilt have a tendency to have hyperextended knees. You want them to just soften, unlock, just like that. And then you're going to keep the knees bent, get a little bit of weight on your heels. From here, I want you to think about pushing the hips back. And a cue that I really like is to take one of your hands, doesn't matter which one, put it at your hip crease. So right about, and you're gonna keep the knees bent, push the hips back just like that, okay? Now, a lot of people will screw this up by bending through your lower back. We don't want that. You have to make sure the hips move backwards, and that's why the finger cue is really useful for that. Also, be careful, because a lot of times peeps will end up straightening their knees as they go back. You don't want to do that, folks, and the reason why is because if you lock your knees out, you're just going to bend at your waist. That's not going to get the hips loosey-goosey the way we so desire. So, unlock the knees, push the hips back. Now we're going to get crazy, folks. Once you're here, you want to maintain that position. You're going to drop your entire body down just like this, maintaining that torso position. If you get it right, you're going to feel back here, kind of glute hamstring area cooking. Now, a lot of times during that phase, this is critical, you gotta make sure that the hips stay back as you drop down. What you don't want is this. If you're staring upright and you're like, oh wow, my chest is up right now, guess what? You're screwing it up. You want soft knees. Push the hips back. You're gonna hang onto the ball right here, drop down about there, feel the glutes and hammies cooking. Take 5 breaths, call your boy Big Z in the morning. There you have it, folks. The why and the how to deal with someone who appears to have a posterior pelvic tilt. What struggles have you had with these types of individuals? What troubles are you still having in increasing hip and pelvis range of motion after you've tried those 2 moves? If you're still having some issues, go ahead, leave a comment below, and I'll do my darndest to answer your questions, or I'll film something else to help you out. Also, if you need some help coaching moves similar to these right here, I've got the solution for you folks, and that is my seminar, Human Matrix. If you're watching this in 2022, we have 3 live seminars going on right now, May 7th and 8th, Buffalo, New York, May 28th and 29th, Seattle, Washington, and August 6th and 7th in Boston, Massachusetts. Link is in the description below if you want to go ahead and sign up. Otherwise, if you want to learn more, please check me out at zachcouples.com. And while you're here hanging watching the video, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button so the fam can keep growing. Otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in. You've been an incredible, outstanding audience, and I hope that you keep it real but not to the extent when things go wrong. Stay hungry, stay learning, stay moving. I'll see you next time. Deuces.